Before we dive in today, I want to give you a little bit of a warning that we're discussing some pretty intense topics like death, depression, mental illness, and suicide. So grab your headphones if you have kids around, or if these topics hit a bit too close to home for your life right now, save this episode for another time. We're always here when you need us. Let's dive in. Hi there, I'm Margaret. Join me for a deep dive into the life of a freelancer. I share my clients' struggles and successes and celebrate those moments that make it oh so worth it. This is Freelance Freedom. Welcome to this episode of Freelance Freedom. I'm so excited to be joined by Dr. Sherry Walling today. Just as a quick intro, Dr. Sherry Walling helps smart people do hard things. She works with leaders and entrepreneurs to tackle the common and uncommon challenges that go along with the pursuit of an extraordinary life. As a clinical psychologist, speaker, yoga teacher, podcaster, entrepreneur, and best-selling author, she draws from her professional expertise as well as personal experience. Her best-selling book, The Entrepreneur's Guide to Keeping Your Shit Together, combines the insight and warmth of a therapist with the truth-telling mirth of someone who has been there. When she's not in the consulting room or hopping stages around the world, Cher can be found on her paddleboard, swinging from the rafters, pretending to be a circus performer, or ushering her 3 kiddos to an art museum in some new fabulous city. Welcome, Sherry. I'm so excited that we're chatting today.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
No problem. So the first thing I want to dive into is your niche specifically. I love your tagline in that you help smart people do hard things. So if you want to expand a little bit about that tagline, how you narrowed down in the niche, and basically how you got to do what you're doing today.
Yeah, that's a great question. Niching is always really hard for me because I like lots of your listeners probably like to do lots of different kinds of things. So it's been hard for me to settle into something that feels like a niche. But I will say that as I've really focused on the mental health of entrepreneurs, business owners, freelancers, that has helped me really master my domain, like become an expert in something that's pretty specific. Mm-hmm. And I talk about helping smart people do hard things because I think conversations about mental health, which is really what I'm doing, conversations about mental health can sound really illness focused. And that's really not what my goal in the world is. My goal in the world is to help people have access to really good information about mental health so that they can keep themselves as well as possible and be successful running their businesses. So part of learning my niche and understanding my niche and who I serve means figuring out ways to talk about what I do that's like I provide, or that's not, I provide mental health care for business owners, because that doesn't sound sexy. People aren't that interested in doing that. But of course, all of us really, really can benefit from more nuanced conversations about how we keep ourselves well and healthy.
Yeah. And I love that you went into specifically, it's not the negative aspects of that and illness that you're focusing on. And it really is mental health at its core focus as well too. So that's awesome.
Yeah. I think when we think about an illness, we think about an abnormal or an outlier kind of experience. And, the rates of burnout, depression, anxiety within entrepreneurs, freelancers, they're pretty high. They're like, depending on which study you look at, they're between 30 and 40%. So those are not exceptional experiences. Those are super common experiences. Mm-hmm. So I think reframing the conversation so that we're not talking about illness, but we're talking about like, hey, this is part of the up and down of running your own business, is that there are going to be times when you are fried, when you are super anxious, when you can't sleep. And rather than like sequester those topics to the corners of like, oh, sounds like you really have a problem, I really want to change the conversation to be like, hey, this is just part of the story. So let's be really proactive and open and figure out how to help make it better, not pretend it's not happening.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's so important to the conversation, totally, like you said too. And just to touch on the rates a little bit, I know without getting into exact statistics, and I'll link some stuff up in the show notes as well too, but just talking about those higher rates, especially in founders and entrepreneurs and things like that, do we know why that is? And in your personal opinion, is it a correlation or a causation, and how how do we kind of wrap our head around that a little bit?
Yeah. So when I talk about rates, there's really only one study, maybe two, that I think has done a really thorough job of looking at mental health concerns in entrepreneurs specifically. So freelancers are even sort of a special crew within the larger crew of entrepreneurs. And I don't know that we've got really great academically informed research about the rates within freelancers. And I'm not talking about like a survey thrown up on a website. I'm talking about someone, Dr. Michael Freeman, who is a professor at UC Berkeley, at UC San Francisco, doing a really comprehensive study. Mm-hmm. So that study Michael Freeman's study suggested that entrepreneurs have higher rates of depression, ADHD, bipolar disorder than their sort of matched age socioeconomic counterparts. There's another study that came out of Denmark that found that entrepreneurs and their significant others, by the way, were more likely to be prescribed medication for anxiety-related disorders than, again, their matched counterparts were. So those are the two kind of sources of data that I'm referencing when I'm talking about elevated rates, because I think that's really important to, cite your sources, be a scientist. So anyway, where do those rates come from? I actually think that most entrepreneurs become entrepreneurs because they aren't thriving in the kind of traditional expectations. So many successful entrepreneurs really struggled in school. Like the rate of not completing college and in many cases, not even completing high school is much higher in successful entrepreneurs than in the general population of that kind of successful person. So these are folks who have learned to sort of forge their own path. And that may be because their ADHD did not facilitate them sitting still and getting those good grades and then going to college and getting that job working in a cube at IBM. Like these are people who don't do cubicles. Like they can't survive in that environment. So sometimes it's because of these underlying mental health issues, uniquenesses, that they have needed to find another way to do their livelihood. And that has led them to entrepreneurship, where you make your own hours. You can work, from at 2 a.m. if you want to. You don't have to sort of follow the structure and schedule that's set down by other people, which is an incredible gift to anyone who's struggling with, mental health concerns or different attentional capacities or different mood regulation. So I think in some ways entrepreneurship is kind of a godsend or a savior for some of the brightest among us who just aren't well situated to sort of be on the treadmill of traditional success.
For sure. And I think I relate to that a lot too, because I always think about, like you said, not being able to thrive or be challenged in those sort of standard cubicle environments. And I think that on top of, and I know I can't speak for everyone, but I know me personally, I think on top of that, because as you know, with entrepreneurs on any level, there's a lot of low lows and there's a lot of high highs. I feel like everything is so exaggerated, and I don't consider myself a adrenaline junkie by any means, but I do think there is an aspect of that that's more exciting to me than sitting in a cubicle. And it's more, and I don't know, like you said, there's these sort of uniquenesses that people have. And I think for me, there is that draw of like, oh, well, I know the lows are low and the highs are high, but there's the excitement of that really lends itself to it, at least for myself, for sure.
Yeah, we can talk about traits like the personality trait openness to new experience, which is pretty high among entrepreneurs. And there's also kind of physiologically, some of us have bodies or brains that are actively seeking more sensation than other people. So it's like, I'm going to go on the thrill ride. Like, I'm going to fly the helicopter. Like, I want to do the things that really make me feel something. And that means that there's a high capacity to tolerate those ups and downs. On the flip side, I do think that there are some parts of entrepreneurship that can exacerbate any underlying kind of mental health conditions. entrepreneurship can be really lonely and isolating, especially for many of your folks who are listening who are freelancers who maybe don't have a team. They could go weeks without talking to another person if they live alone. I think that kind of isolation can really trigger depression in folks. Mm-hmm. I think, when you are an entrepreneur and you are alone responsible for that paycheck, you either, you're brilliant and you get paid. If you're not brilliant, you don't get paid. Like that sort of all or nothing stakes can certainly create a lot of anxiety. I think the work of entrepreneurship can be relentless, and that can certainly create some burnout. So there's no coasting, which is why lots of us love it, and also why sometimes it can really mess with us. It can mess with our well-being.
Yeah, for sure. Because as exciting, like you said, as exciting as those sort of highs and lows are, after a while it takes its toll physically and of course mentally too, because there's only so long you can like kind of keep going from one extreme to the other. So I think, like you said too, is that again, I'm speculating, but I'm guessing that's why there's more experience of burnout because of these extreme levels.
Yeah, I think people work really hard.
Yeah, totally.
Because people, love what they do. It's really tied into their identity and their sense of what brings them meaning and value as a human being. There are pros and cons to that. But, I think about some of my friends, even highly trained professionals who work for larger organizations, and they coast a little bit more than I do. Like, being an entrepreneur is a hustle. And that, like you say, does take a toll over time, especially if you are not mindfully protecting your greatest asset, which is, of course, your mind. Mm-hmm. And that requires some work on our part. It requires a lot of intention and some effort, which kind of goes against the inertia of entrepreneurship, which can just be like hustle more, work longer, do more, take another project. To be able to say, no, I need to stop, or I need to focus, or I need to go on vacation. Those things feel really counterintuitive, but are often a really great investment in our businesses because they're a great investment in the health of our brains, of just keeping the neurons connected and healthy.
Yeah, for sure. And it's that, and that's the thing too, like I feel like slowing down is like the last thing that an entrepreneur wants to hear, but it's so important to recharge, especially when I know so many of us work remotely and so many freelancers work from home and stuff like that too. And it's so hard, or it can be very hard to maintain those boundaries of downtime, especially when your office is your home as well too. So there's that aspect that I think is missing, where you're not leaving a cubicle and actually going to a separate place at home. Like when these things become intertwined, I think it's so hard for entrepreneurs to mentally shut one off and then start kind of relaxation in the same place that they work, for sure.
Yeah. It's funny that you mentioned this. It's actually the topic of the podcast that I recorded that came out today.
Oh, awesome.
Which is a little bit of the Mr. Rogers phenomenon. I don't know if you remember Mr. Rogers, the PBS show that many of us grew up with, but he would come home from work, whatever Mr. Rogers did for a day job. And the first thing he would do is he's like walking in his door and singing the welcome song for the show. He takes off his sports coat and puts on his cardigan, and he takes off his leather shoes and he puts on his tennis shoes or slippers or something. And there's this really clear transition from work Mr. Rogers to, singing, storytelling Mr. Rogers. And I think that is one of the things that we miss as entrepreneurs, freelancers who are working from home, is we don't have those transition cues. And so we have to sort of fabricate them. We have to make them up, which means you create your little workspace on your kitchen table or your office or your desk or wherever it is. It means there's still a ritual of okay, I'm done now. I'm going to close my computer. I'm going to put it in a drawer. I'm going to change clothes, which I think is a big one, from my professional clothes to my yoga clothes, or my I'm just going to go walk the dog clothes. Whatever it is that can sort of signify a shift for you can be a great invitation to your brain to know okay, we're switching context now. You don't have to be on super smart content writer mode right now. You can be on, hey, what's going on with my dog mode right now? And those physical practices, the totems that we have in our lives, the significance of like our computer versus the leash that with which we walk our dog, those can be really helpful things for our brain to know that it's time to shift gears.
Nice. That's so great. And it's something that I definitely want to start implementing myself, because I definitely have been guilty of falling into the whole idealism of work from your pajamas, don't wear pants to a meeting. So there's definitely these sort of like cliches from working from home that perpetuate it being okay to roll out of bed from your pajamas, and that makes that line so blurry. So having very specific like things like, and I think like you said too, I've never done that. I've never kind of changed clothes at the end of my shift, but I could see how that could be a huge just like mindset shift in that I'm out of my professional clothes and I'm into relaxation. I feel like just even that act like could have sort of like physiological changes on relaxing. Totally.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So when people, I know you touched on a little bit. So when people work from home, we talked a bit about isolation. And I know that a lot of people, myself all included, identify as like introvert and extrovert. And I identify as an introvert because I enjoy spending my time alone, and that's how I feel like I unwind and I get energy and stuff. But I also wonder if using the label of introvert almost excuses the isolation that you kind of force yourself into. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think an introvert is someone who really recharges with time alone. It doesn't mean they should be alone all the time. Really, really core to who we are as humans is to be tribal, is to be connected in relationship to other people. So certainly someone who is living alone, working alone, spending their days alone, that's going to be problematic over time for anyone. But I think for introverts especially, it's about being wise with how you use your social energy, and, probably going to do much better in a quiet conversation with two other people than you're going to do in a bar where there's like a large networking mixer event with a bunch of strangers. I mean, that's going to zap your energy for 4 days. Yeah. But getting together with two people maybe who you don't even really know well in the quiet corner of a coffee shop is likely to be a much better use of your social energy. I think relationships are one of the first things to go when we get busy with our businesses. And it feels so easy to say like, oh, I'm not going to go to that, yoga class, or I'm not going to do that meetup, or I'm not going to go to church this week. I'm just going to like heads down on this project. And that is usually not the right choice, mostly because there's no way to cultivate relationships without showing up, without going to the thing and putting the time in. And relationships are hands down the most important. We talk about it in research, we call it protective factors, but they're the most important asset that you can have available to you if you are going to go through a really hard thing. So if your business implodes, if your mom dies, if you get cancer, if you get in a car accident, any of those things that happen in our lives, not all the time, but most of us will have one or two of them happen in the course of our adulthood. Those are the times when you need that little circle of friends that you've cultivated. So if you let that go, and if that hard thing happens to you and there's no safety net for you, that is the recipe for having pretty significant mental health consequences. Yeah. That's the recipe for deep isolation and loneliness. So anyway, it's one of those things that's just an investment to make all the time over the course of your life, even if it takes a lot of energy. Even if you're an introvert and it's like not your preferred activity, it's still often the right choice, so long as you do it strategically.
Yeah, for sure. And I think like anything else, it's a challenge, and it's definitely something that doesn't come naturally to me, but like all things that don't come naturally to people, it's a practice. I think it's just something that needs to be put into practice, make social commitments, follow through, and all that kind of stuff as well. For sure. Because like you said, I definitely, when I have more, I mean, when it comes up to like, oh, well, I don't want to go out or I don't want to leave my house. Of course, those thoughts come up as they do with a lot of people. But I always, afterwards, you just feel so much better in the feeling of like community and fulfillment. Definitely. And I can see that being cumulative over time. And especially when you hit those rough times, having these people to be able to lean on and reach out to.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I also did want to touch on a few things that can come from maybe long-term stressors and isolation and especially pre-existing conditions. And I wanted to get into topics like suicide, because I know that it's more prevalent in the founders community. I know even in the general population, I think I saw from the CDC since 1999, it's gone up something around like the 30%, which is crazy. And I know it's
growth.
Yeah, it's a topic that's not very much talked about. So I wanted to kind of get your thoughts on, why are people not talking about it? What can we do to talk about it? What can we do to support a more normalized conversation around it? And basically get your thoughts on that.
Yeah. And I'm so glad that you are talking about it. It's one of the themes that I try to touch on in, any of the work that I do in public, because it's such a scary word and it's such a scary experience. But once you start to talk about it, you'll realize that many, many people have been impacted by suicide in some way, whether it's a friend from high school or, a cousin or someone. And it really is a very lonely kind of grief for people who've been touched by suicide. Many, many people have suicidal thoughts. Probably nearly everyone has some kind of suicidal thought at some point or another. Sometimes they can be quite ferocious and unrelenting in our minds. And again, I think that's one of the things that it's probably important to just sort of say to folks, like, this is normal as you weather some of the ups and downs, that your mind goes there sometimes. So if in my line of work, I think one of the things that people get really nervous about talking to me about is they're like, if I tell you this, does this mean that like you're going to send me to the hospital and in an ambulance with a police escort?
Right.
The answer is vast majority of times no. That's not what it means. If you're holding a gun, maybe yes. Right. But one of the things that keeps it so quiet is people are worried, what's going to happen if I voice this? And does that mean that, I'm on the fast track to the funny farm? And no, that's not what it means.
Okay. I was just going to say, I'm so glad that you touched on that, because I feel like spoken and unspoken, that is anyone that I've talked to that, like you said, has been touched by it. That has almost been the biggest fear, is they're almost more comfortable talking to friends, because they're like, no, if I talk to my therapist about this, I'm going to be committed. I'm going to lose my job. I'm going to lose my family. They're going to take my kids away from me. And I think that is understandably such a huge fear. And I'm so glad that you brought it up, that the answer is, generally speaking, no. But of course, if someone's life is immediately in danger, there's obviously
right.
But
then I don't care if you don't like me. I'm going to try to keep you alive.
Exactly. Yeah, for sure.
And, I will say that like our systems to try to help people who are in that level of crisis are really shitty. I don't know if I can say shitty on your podcast, but like, often, ERs aren't really healing places. They're emergency places. And at least, especially within the United States, we just don't have good spots to help people feel like they can go somewhere to be safe for a while. So I empathize with the fact that people are like, I don't want to tell anybody because I don't want anything to happen. And the reality is it's much easier to deal with or talk through some of the darker, sort of scarier thoughts in a therapist's office than it is in an ER. So we try to, generally speaking, we try to keep people engaged in the treatment that they're already engaged in. And I think there are not perfect ways to predict who is most likely to act on those kinds of thoughts. We know that certainly people are more vulnerable when they're under the influence of substances. If they're drinking, if they're using other substances that are impairing the filter in their frontal lobe that might say, yes, I feel really bad, but that doesn't mean I'm going to act on it, that makes people more vulnerable. Certainly isolated people are more vulnerable. But generally, quite simply, when someone is having those kinds of thoughts, I try to work with them for a stall tactic, because suicidal thoughts, they do come and go. And when they're with us, they feel so loud and so powerful. But often if we can get someone to just sort of sit down and wait for a while, or whatever the analogy might be,
right.
The thoughts do get quieter and they sort of fade into the distance and they're replaced by other thoughts or other problems or other things. So when those thoughts are really strong, it's time to go to bed and binge watch Netflix for a while. Just wait it out for a bit, because I promise that it won't always feel that way. Mm-hmm. Might feel worse, might feel better, but it's not going, you won't be stuck in this moment forever.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's so important. I'll email you afterwards, and I'll also link up some resources in the show notes as well too. But if there is, because I know there's hotlines and stuff in Canada, and I imagine there probably is in the US as well too.
Yeah, so absolutely.
Of course, if you can get through it. But like you said too, if you can wait it out and watch Netflix, and also, if I'm not mistaken, I think you can, in the US as well, there's places that you can call that they'll wait through it with you, mm-hmm. which is good. So I'm so glad that we're talking about it. I'm so glad to hear that you're not going to, if you bring it up to a healthcare professional, you're not going to get shipped away. So I think that's a big thing that we want to emphasize for sure. So I'm really happy that we cleared some up. Totally.
Yeah, it's just better. It's hard to talk about it, but it's better to talk about it.
Yeah.
With a friend, and you can tell your friend, look, I'm just having some really dark thoughts, man. Can you just hang out with me for a bit? Let's go for, I'm just having some dark thoughts. That can be the code word.
Nice.
You don't need to go to all the details, but I think telling people is one of the most important things that you can do.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, so on the other side of things too, if someone came to you saying as a friend that they had some dark thoughts, what are some of your suggestions to best support that person?
I think to the extent that you're comfortable, you can ask some very gentle, kind of curious questions. Do you want to tell me what the thoughts are? Are they things you feel like you might do? What can we do to help you wait it out? Can I stay with you for a while? Or, this is a tricky one, but most successful completed suicides happen with a firearm. So I don't recommend this, generally speaking, but there's sometimes a time and place to be like, hey, can I take your gun home with me tonight? There's legal challenges to that. Or can I take the key to your gun safe is probably the best case.
Yeah. Don't
take the weapon, take the means away. But if you're having that conversation, you don't have to go there as a friend. But it's an okay question to ask, to be like, how, what are the dark thoughts and how can we make it harder for you to follow through on them? How can I stay with you? How can we minimize the likelihood that this will happen? At most suicidal behavior is relatively impulsive. Right. So it might be that the thoughts kind of linger in the background, but then the actual action tends to be fairly impulsive. Mm-hmm. So the harder that we can make it for impulsive actions to be deadly, the better.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah, that's some really great advice. And I think even just those questions that you outlined, I mean, they're inquisitive and non-judgmental. And I think that's so important, because I think if the person felt that they were being judged or wrong in any way, I think that's the worst route to go down. So like you said, being supportive, inquisitive, and staying calm, for sure.
Yeah.
I'm so glad we got to talk on that. We're going to switch around and talk about some lighter stuff soon.
Yeah.
But I want to talk about, I want to touch on something.
Death, drugs, and sex. Let's do it.
Sure, yeah. So just to keep talking a little bit about loss, there's a lot of ways that loss affects us as people, of course, but also as entrepreneurs. So there's the loss of ourselves, and I think that's also something that people, and in this situation, I don't necessarily mean suicide, but preparing for like these meat suits don't last forever, right? So preparing for the loss whenever it does happen. And I think that's especially working for yourself, it's something that a lot of people like to avoid because death is a touchy topic, rightfully so, a lot of the time. And if you want to touch a little bit about people's hesitation to make plans for themselves and how it really benefits people around them to kind of have their affairs in order, especially as an entrepreneur and freelancer, because it's a lot of times if you have a job, there's sometimes there's certain things in place, but even more so now you have this business and what happens with the business when you're gone.
Yeah. I will say, both as an entrepreneur myself and as someone who's married to an entrepreneur, those questions have been super, super important. Mm-hmm. Because, frankly, none of us knows when our time will come. Yeah. And whether it's a heart attack or a car accident or cancer, we just don't know. And I think it's been really important for my husband and I to have these kinds of conversations, largely because the kind of work that he does, like I have no idea what to do with. And he really also can't step into my business as a psychologist. Yes. So we're not going to be able to take over each other's work, really.
Yeah.
So we kind of made a day of it and spent some time thinking together just with the two of us. And then we met with our attorney to talk about a trust. And we put, everything in place, like including things like if he were to pass away suddenly, these are the 3 people that I need to call to take over the interim running of his business. And then these are the 3 people that I need to call to sell the business. And like, these are the people that he trusts and they know that they're in this plan. So they know where information is and what to do about it. Mm-hmm. And it's a small thing. I mean, it takes a couple days and it takes some research. So it's not that small, but it really is a gift to your significant other, to your children, even to yourself, to know that that plan is in place, because you're working really hard to create something. And if you don't plan well, there is a chance that the thing that you've made will sort of languish in bureaucratic mess if you don't proactively protect it and protect, your family from having to go through that kind of legal nonsense journey.
Yeah, for sure. And it's a tough thing for a lot of people to face, but I know about 2 years ago, sat down with my lawyer. We went through everything. We went through what I wanted for the arrangements and all of that stuff. And I can say, I have a weirdly relatively comfortable relationship with death, I think, but afterwards there was still this huge relief of it's on paper, it's taken care of. My lawyer has it. Everyone in my family has the lawyer's numbers, and that's really the only person they need to call because he knows how to execute everything that's on there. So it feels like there's a sense of completion, and there's a sense of it's almost like there's some sort of peace and like calm in that as well too. Yeah.
I think one of the best strategies to sort of help us manage our anxiety is to be clear about controlling what we can control, proactively taking steps, and then you got to let the rest of it go. So you can't spend endless time worrying about your death or when it will come, but you can control the paperwork, right? You can control that the phone numbers have been distributed appropriately. Like those are things that are within your ability to make it easier for people when or if a tragedy happens. And then the rest of it, it's like you said, you've done what you can. And so there's this sense of calm and peace that comes in because nothing more I can do.
Yeah, exactly. And I think what you mentioned about taking initiative on the things that you have control over and kind of having to leave everything else up to the universe or God or whatever it is, I think that's a nice overarching theme that hopefully we can carry into the rest of our lives too. Because I think that and I know we're talking like a little bit bigger picture now, but I think that those are the things that people a lot of the times toil over in their business. And this is what creates like so much stress and inevitably some burnout and stuff too, is like and I know I find myself in there too, but this obsession about a lot of times things that we can't control.
The what if monsters.
Oh yeah. Oh my God.
Yeah.
All the time. And I know that was like a huge piece of advice, just having to let go. And I know meditation's helped myself a little bit for that, but in your practice, what are some other tools that people can use to, like we said too, it is a practice. It's not something that's going to come overnight, but things that people can do to take control over the things that they can, but also the things that they can't, just to be able to let them go.
Yeah, I think writing is a great tool. Awesome. Lots of research to support the value of things like journaling. But when you feel that your mind is burdened and that you're kind of like spinning or just laden with thoughts, one of the best things that you can do is like scoop yourself up out of bed, go find a pencil or pen and a good old-fashioned notebook and just write the thoughts down. And write constantly for 4 or 5 minutes. Don't worry about grammar, punctuation, just get it out, sort of like word vomit. And then take a minute to sort of look back over it and ask yourself that question. What on this list of worries or concerns or thoughts is within my control? And then like recopy those into a list. And what are the things that I'm carrying that are simply not within my control? And recopy those things into a list. And then, then you have sort of this other choice of the things that are within your control, what actions are possible. The things that are outside of your control, how can you help yourself cope better with the lack of control that you have? Because you do have some control over your thoughts and feelings. Not perfect, but some authority or some influence, I should say, over your thoughts and feelings. And so the things that are outside of your control, even then you can still sort of ask yourself the question of like, how can I feel better about this? Do I need to stop watching so much news? Do I need to, talk about things you don't have control over that are upsetting? But like, do I need to be more proactive in other parts of my life so I feel less burdened by this part of my life that I can't do anything about?
Right. That's such a great exercise. And it's the first time I've heard about it. It's so funny too, because I have heard some people say like writing and journaling have helped me a lot, but I haven't actually done it myself. But it's been coming up a lot lately. So it's like, okay, I get it. Like now it's
the universe is speaking.
Yeah. It's like, okay, this is the time to commit. And I really liked that exercise you pointed out of actually like, after you've written, because that's what I always wondered about journaling. It's like, okay, well, after I journal, then what? But I liked how you said to kind of like divide it into these lists of things that are, I want to say actionable, because everything as an entrepreneur has to be actionable, but these things that are actionable, but also taking into account the things that are just not actionable and making peace with those.
Yeah. The science behind this sort of falls into this, I guess, term called metacognition, which is our ability to think about our own thinking. Oh. And I know it sounds very fancy. I'm just going to go metacognate right now. But really what I'm going to do is journal. So when we get our thoughts down on paper, they're separate from us. They cease to be part of the alphabet soup that lives in our brain, and they're down in a more objective, separate way where we can see them differently. And that gives us a little bit of power to use our magic wand to shift them around. So they no longer feel like they're part of us. There's something that exists a little bit more separate from us. Mm-hmm. And so we can think about them differently or engage with them differently, which is, this sort of metacognitive process of thinking about our own thinking.
Right. Yeah. I know we touched on a lot of some controversial and some topics that people don't talk about too, but there are a couple questions that just to straight up get your answer, is work-life balance a thing? Does it exist?
I don't know.
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
I don't know if it's like a helpful question.
Right.
I like, my clients make fun of me because I'm like, how you feeling? It's such a stupid therapist question. But it is the question. It's the question.
It's true. Yeah.
Like the answer to work-life balance is like, how do I feel about how I'm showing up in my life? Yeah. Am I stressed and frantic and screaming at my kids to get out the door because I'm late for a meeting? Like, that's not work-life balance because I'm miserable and I'm spreading my misery to others. Sometimes I'm like scheduled back to back to back, but I'm like enjoying what I'm doing. And then I take a 10-minute break and go play Frisbee with my kid. And then I come back and do my work. Like, is that work-life balance? Yes, because I'm living in a level of joy and engagement. And I feel like my brain is being used, but not overwhelmed. So I don't think we can tackle work-life balance perfectly with scheduling grids or time boxing or, 50% of effort here and 50% there. That's just not how it works. But the question that you just have to get good at asking yourself is like, how am I doing? How do I feel? And that's what tells you if you're well or not well. That's what tells you if you need to change your schedule or get more help or, dial back your hours or whatever.
Yeah. And I'm so glad that you brought that up too, because I think, like you said, it looks different for everyone. I mean, I feel like the pendulum's kind of swung as far as hustle goes. People were very like you always got to hustle for like a very long time. And then there was I feel like there's this almost like anti-hustle movement, but
kill the hustle porn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then part of me is like, well, but I feel like it comes in phases. Like I'm not a big weekend person. I would rather work for like 3 or 4 weeks straight and then take a full week off.
Cool.
And I think that it's funny because for working day and night, a bunch of days in a row, some people are like work-life balance and start kind of like hustle shaming you. And it's like, no, but I like that and I enjoy it. And then I also like taking like 2 days in the middle of the week for me it doesn't feel like it's any time off. So I would rather push through and see that sort of like light at the end of the tunnel that I can take this vacation or something. So yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that it looks a little bit different for everyone.
And you figure that out by asking the question, how does this feel to me?
Mm-hmm.
There's just lots of like gurus and experts that will sort of sell you their perfect morning plan to optimize your productivity. And it's like, it's great ideas, but ultimately the only thing that matters is how you are doing, right? Am I focused? Am I productive? Am I happy with my work? Am I generally joyful when I go about my day? Then you're doing it right, period, no matter what they want to sell you.
Yeah.
But if you are living in a lot of anxiety and shame and sort of constantly telling yourself, I should be doing this better, I should be doing this differently, then like you're not well. So then you have to sort of play some experimenting and figure out a different schedule or a different plan or a different arrangement that might work better for you.
Yeah, for sure. And because we touched on a lot today and I do want to end on, we talked a lot of heavy stuff. So I want to end on a little bit of a lighter note.
Yeah.
We talked about, you mentioned how to, especially for work-life balance, how to find something that works for you. And I sort of want to end off talking about, we often as entrepreneurs, especially, we get bogged down on the things that we have to do. And I find myself doing this all the time by not celebrating successes, big or small. So I do want to talk a little bit about how can we take pause and celebrate our successes a little bit more and give ourselves a little bit more credit. And really, I find that people are stuck in their work all the time. It's hard to take a step back and be like, oh wait, there are some really great big things that I've accomplished. I need to take some time to look at that and feel really good about it.
Yeah, I think so. Not celebrating successes is one of the drivers of burnout and one of the hallmarks of burnout, actually. There's sort of like 6 or 7 things that consistently show up in the research literature that cause burnout, and not taking time to celebrate is one of them.
Interesting.
So it's not just like, oh, isn't it nice to have a party? It's like, no, if you want to stay working hard in a sustainable way, like you have to give yourself pause. So a couple of ways to do that are another little sort of journaling practice, but at the end of each workday, just 2 sentences, high point of the day, low point of the day. So tracking the high point of the day does tell you what's going well, where you feel engaged, where you feel successful. Tracking the low point, of course, gives you some information about things that might need to change or problems that, you need to give some attention to working around. And tracking that kind of data can be super, super helpful. I also think, when you are at the completion of a big project or when you have a big goal, whether it's a quarterly goal, a financial goal, just a completion goal, to give yourself a little bonus there that can look like lots of different things. It can, look like a new pair of shoes or just an afternoon off on a hike. Like, it doesn't have to be material or monetary, but it's a way of telling yourself, hey, you did it. You did a good job. Mm-hmm. And that's a hard skill. I think most of us are much better at doing that with other people than we are with ourselves. But if you're a freelancer, if you're a solopreneur, then you are your own boss and you better figure out how to be a good boss, because otherwise you're going to have a disgruntled employee on your hands. You have to live with that disgruntled employee all the time, and that's just going to be miserable.
Yeah, for sure. Nice. Awesome. So I know that I said that I want to leave on a high note, but you did touch on burnout a little bit. And I know you said there was a specific list of indicators. Now I'm so curious what the rest of the list is. So,
oh my goodness. Okay. Let me see if I can bust them out off the top of my head. I did give a talk about this at Business of Software, which is a publicly available video. So if I miss one,
okay, awesome.
Check
and
that
we'll
out.
Link that up too in the show notes. So
yeah, but it's basically like too much work, not enough social support or engagement, lack of clear goals, not celebrating successes, a gap between how you spend your days and what you find most meaningful. And there's one more that is escaping me, but
I feel like that's so
those
perfect.
are the meaty ones.
It's so
we'll
perfect.
just leave an ellipsis there.
Yeah, I was going to say, because then we can say, to find out the last one, you're going to have to go and watch the video. So that's so perfect. We covered a lot of ground today. I feel like we could cover so much more, but I also want to be respectful for yours and of course the listeners' time. And please, I want to give you just a little bit to tell us what's going on. Where can people find you and all that good stuff?
Yeah. So I live online at sherrywalling.com and zenfounder.com. And I have a podcast where I talk about things related to family life, mental health, sanity, really for entrepreneurs. And that's called Zen Founder, Zen Founder. I think you mentioned at the beginning, I wrote a book recently with my husband called The Entrepreneur's Guide to Keeping Your Shit Together. And my 12-year-old son came up with that title. So
love it.
Both proud and embarrassed. Yeah. And this is my life's work, is to help people like you feel like they are able to do what they most want to do and are well in their minds and in their relationships. So people should definitely feel free to reach out to me via either of those channels, and I'll be happy to chat.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And I highly recommend you guys go over and check out Zen Founder. The episodes are incredible. I was just introduced to it a couple weeks ago and I can't get enough of it. So please go over, check it out. And I want to thank you so much, Dr. Sherry Walling, for joining us today. And you've given such amazing tips and actually actionable steps too to take.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Dr. Sherry. Thank you so much for spending your time with me. As always, I love to keep the conversation going. So head over to Twitter or Instagram at Margaret Fell. That's at MargrefFell. And tag me or slide into my DMs with any questions you may have. You can also find me at my home base of margrefell.com for all the resources. I'll see you next time.